The Space, Chapter 1.
Once upon a time, there was a village called the Milky Way. It was part of the galaxy, but not many people lived in the Milky Way. The order of the kingdoms started with the ruler, the sun. Then, the other kingdoms were aligned. First Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and finally Pluto. Every kingdom had to go around the sun so that the sun would be able to work.
Although some are very magical,
It was magical.
there were conflicts between the planets. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune were considered the popular kingdoms. The group was known as the gas giants.
They were very large and cool.
They had so much power because they were made of special substances like hydrogen and helium. They're not only cool and large, but they were rich. They had rings around their equator.
As you can see, Jupiter has different layers. First, it has a thin and cold atmosphere. You might be able to see hazes. Then, you go a little deeper and you can see clouds that reflect sunlight just like clouds on Earth. There are strong weather patterns such as winds. As you go deeper, the temperature is warmer and the clouds are made of different materials. As you go even farther, the atmosphere becomes so dense that it turns into liquid. As you get closer to the center of the planets, the material gets so dense that they solidify.
Jupiter was the biggest but slowest kingdom of them all. It was 10 times bigger than the Earth in diameter and 1,200 times bigger in volume. It took 12 years for Jupiter to go around the Sun. Jupiter had to make a complete turn itself so that the whole kingdom could have the energy to work, because when it rotated on its axis, it would create fast winds and stormy weathers. That's why no planet dared to bother Jupiter, because it would stop moving whenever he got mad. Believe it or not, Jupiter has more bands of winds that move to the east and west like the Earth. Cold, white, and ammonia crystal-made clouds along the bands of winds reflect sunlight. Storms can form when the bands of winds move in opposite directions, and there's no land that could slow them down.
Saturn was the first kingdom to become wealthy. It was known for its rings. Its rings were made of chunks of ice. It was just a little smaller than Jupiter, but its mass was less than 1/3 of Jupiter. Saturn was known as the kingdom of the seasons. It was tilted at 27 degrees, so sunlight hit on the northern hemisphere. The rings in that hemisphere were brighter than the rings in the southern hemisphere. When light hit the northern hemisphere of Saturn's rings, astronomers knew that it was winter.
Uranus and Neptune were 1/3 of Jupiter's diameter. It was made up of 15% hydrogen and helium. The rest of them were made up of heavier gases such as methane, ammonia, and water. That's why Uranus and Neptune were denser and heavier than Jupiter. The farther away a kingdom was from the sun, the slower it was. Uranus rotated on its axis, so when there was a solstice, one pole of Uranus pointed towards the sun. Uranus had a blue-green appearance and Neptune had a deep blue. All planets had methane gas above a layer of white puffy cotton candy, today known as clouds. Sunlight passed through the gas, reflected off the clouds, and then passed through the gas on its way out. The methane gas absorbed the red, orange, and yellow colors of the sunlight, so green, blue, and violet light left the atmosphere. That's why Uranus and Neptune had the colors they had.
Pluto was the smallest planet of them all. Its mass was less than 0.3% of the Earth's mass. Since it was so small and so far away from the other planets, no one really knew what the planet had in the inside.
Moons. Pluto's garden was called Charon, and it had the diameter about half of the kingdom. They moved together around the sun. Their orbit was different from the other kingdoms. Kingdoms would go perfectly around the sun, while Pluto didn't. Pluto had too many things that made him.
Saturn's largest moon, Titan, had a really dense atmosphere of nitrogen, although a haze hid it. Jupiter had 4 moons: Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Io had volcanoes and Europa had long ridges. Some other moons of gas giants were smaller than Pluto. The smallest ones had irregular shapes.
There were these mysterious things that nobody knew why or how they were there, called asteroids. Most asteroids had irregular shapes, and some other ones were broken pieces of other ones that were larger. Some of them just orbited around Mars and Jupiter. That region filled with asteroids was called the asteroid belt. The mass of all the asteroids in there put together were estimated to be less than the mass of our moon. The surface of all asteroids were covered with craters, broken rocks, and dust. Asteroids were filled with craters because of the amount of things that hit them.
Last but not least, we have the comets. Comets are celestial objects made up of rocks and metals that orbit around the sun in an oval shape. They produce comas, which are fuzzy clouds. Comets are materials left in a galaxy that got together and froze. Whenever they were near the sun, they started melting. When they passed through the Earth, you could see the nucleus and the tail. The tail were the materials that were not completely frozen, but were part of the comets.
The Earth orbited around the sun at a speed of 100,000 kilometers per hour. Meteors were particles that burnt up when they traveled to the Earth's surface. A fireball was when the meteors turned to a bright color. Meteorites were the meteors that had already arrived on the Earth's surface.
Now, little Minky, do you not understand why we told you this story?
I understand. They are not kingdoms. They're planets, right?
Right, this was just an easier way for you to understand it, you little baby.
Now I finally understand the solar system.